Hi everyone, and welcome to Tella's webinar on refinancing. So tonight on the panel we've got Sarah from the One Up project.
Hi.
And we've got Ben, who's our subject matter expert from Tella. So this is our first webinar, so we're kind of new to it, and we're working out our technology tonight too. So if we get any disruptions with that, we'll let you know, or you let us know, but I think it's all going to work well. We're going to take questions tonight. So one of the things that we'd like you to do is just use the chat function for those questions, and we'll collate them as we go along. So let's get started. Why refinance? That's the first question. And we're going to run through a few of the points that are on the screen in front of you now. But the key things are better interest rates, incentives, the ability to release equity that's already in your home out of your home and into something else apart from your home, and just better overall banking terms. Before you refinance, making sure that you've got a good reason to refinance is important. So we're going to run through these in a bit more detail now. So market conditions is kind of actually another way of us saying when's a good time to do this, and now's a good time to refinance refinance with another bank. So this is why we're doing the webinar tonight. So let's start, Ben, with some of the things that we've got there in terms of triggers that are making us think about refinance more at the moment.
Yeah, so the main thing would be the incentives. So at the moment, the banks are all out. They're really trying to get as much business as they possibly can and retain it. Because we've got basically a low sales environment. There isn't many new houses happening, so they're looking to also house purchases. So they're looking to poach off other banks and to get more business. The biggest one would be that 1% cashback.
So it comes back to the low sales thing and them trying to actually gain some traction, get some loan activity. Yeah.
So basically we're seeing incentives up to $20,000 cash, 1% for any loans to refinance over. And they're putting a lot of pressure on and doing short-term sort of sales pitches to try and get as much in there as possible. But I'd say they're going to be extended out because we normally have our spring home loan campaigns coming up in the next month as well.
And what would they normally be? What would those incentives normally be?
Most of the time it's up to $3,000.
Right.
So you're looking at sort of 0.25% or 0.5% of the loan amount. To put that in perspective, so a $500,000 loan, normally you'd get $2,500 to $3,000. At the moment, it's more like $5,000.
Okay. Yeah.
It's quite a big difference.
High interest rates, how does that affect our thinking around refinancing?
Yeah, so if you're like the majority of people at the moment coming off sort of a 2.29% or 2.79%, and you've had it all fixed the last 12 months, you're now looking at 5.5% interest rates. So given that there's such a big jump up, we really want to look around and see what specials are happening.
Yeah. So, and we've got cost of living on there last, which is just those overall costs of everything going up at the moment, and just watching that overall budget. But maybe we'll move forward and talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. So if rates go up, what's the risk to you and how will it affect your lifestyle? So that's coming back to that point around we've got inflationary pressure putting our living costs up, and we've got bank rates going up. So something's got to give a little bit. Considerations, right? Do you want to run through this, Ben?
Yeah, so will I benefit financially? So the big thing to me at the moment is that most people are sitting, we'll say, with a $600,000 loan around the country, and they're on 2.29 or 2.79%. And the trend over the last 5, 6, 7 years has always been to sort of refix. Now that we're looking to go to 5.5% interest rates, the biggest difference, because it works out to be a cost about $500 per fortnight more that people are going to have to pay from go from those low rates to those high rates of the fixed all in. So for me, the biggest thing is financially is working out what you can save to reduce that down and to spread some of that risk as well, and to counter that with obviously some contributions and things.
Okay. So will I benefit financially? That's a net benefit essentially, isn't it? So it's the benefits less the costs. So let's look at the costs. Let's look at the benefits, and then we can focus on the costs. Yeah. So better interest rates. Well, we kind of covered that off a little bit, but what we're looking at here is an upward rate market, so it's hard to win, but there's still room to think about how I best lock in those interest rates to secure my position effectively.
Yeah, and then it comes down to strategy. So that's in regards to so better interest rates, but also potentially spreading out the interest rates and having them over different terms and different sort of time frames, whether that's the 1 year, 2 years, depending on what his situation is. So, and then comparing also what incentives there are, because a good amount of cash up front doesn't necessarily mean take a slightly higher rate. Maybe actually other banks with lower cash contributions, but with a better interest rate.
So it's weighing up the benefit of the rate versus the benefit of the cash and looking at it as a whole.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, there are still some banks out there that are offering incredibly low rates for online refinances, but no cash at all. So if you are looking long term, then potentially a better interest rate and no cash can move to.
And just for the sake of the audience, let's just talk a little bit about those cash incentives and how they work. I mean, you mentioned there that one bank has it and another doesn't. And we talked a little bit about them all chasing the business. But yeah, is it a one-off, or how does it actually work? And
yeah, so once you're approved, so you go through for the refinance, you get your approval, and then there'll be a negotiation at that time for interest rates, because we obviously try to negotiate better rates than what's actually advertised out there, and then we'll negotiate a cash contribution as well. Now, the cash contribution is paid on settlement, and it's more of a reimbursement. From my perspective, I always see it as coming more from a marketing pull from the bank, because they're using that to bring in new business. It comes with a couple of catches. So they're trying to buy your business and they want to keep you. So they want to keep you for 3 or 4 years as a minimum. And so, because once you're in sort of in that part, it's not often that you would then refinance away. So to do that, they have a cashback. So if you look to refinance away within a period of 3 or 4 years, depending on the bank, so refinance, repay your home loan in full, or sell the property and repay it, then a cash. And if you're going to do that within especially a 3-year period, then that cashback is not ready for you, because when you do that, you're going to have to pay it back to the bank.
Yeah.
So, and they'll take that from your settlement proceeds when you do it. So it works out really well for them, because the amount of people that do have been buying and selling. So therefore, they've given these great incentives at the start, and then they've also got the money back again. So, yeah.
You mentioned around negotiating rates. Just a bit of context for the audience. I don't currently own a home, so refinancing for me is not a thing because I don't need to do it. But I have a few questions as someone who doesn't own a home and hasn't owned one. So you said that you can, or we would negotiate those rates. So who does the negotiation? How does that happen?
Yeah, so as advisors and brokers, effectively we go through to the banks. Now, some banks are actually really upfront. At the start of the week, they go, here is our best rates, this is what we can do. And they have a sort of a matrix as such. And that comes down to whether the home loan is up to 250,000 or if it's 500,000 or 500,000 or more. So the bigger the home loan, they will look at negotiating those rates. So there's some banks are really transparent, where others, it's a case-by-case basis. So we're constantly going through. So, and so once we've confirmed the deal, the application, and it's all done, and we've been through to the bank, we get interest rate and we get cash. And so some of that negotiation is also if the person knows whether they're going to keep the property for 3-4 years, because we'll look at the banks will also change the interest rates versus cash. So,
and there's other benefits that come up from time to time, and there's a few around at the moment. And the one we've got on the screen is eco loan that ANZ is doing, which is kind of like a green incentive to try and get you to spend a bit of money in a green way. So $80,000 loan at 1% interest rate.
It's 1% for up to 3 years.
For up to 3 years, and you can spend that on solar panels or a Tesla or whatever you want, as long as it sort of fits that green or ticks the green box, if you like. So Other types like that? Do we still see?
Over the years, we've had Kiwibank doing trips to Fiji or Rarotonga. There's been TVs that are given away. There's been cash incentives. There's a lot. And I really do think in the next 2 months, we're going to see a lot more. Spring home loan campaigns, they're going to push it out.
Especially as travel opens up, I suppose.
So it'll be the cash or it'll be the trips overseas.
Okay.
On that though, just to clarify, because obviously I was mentioning that if you sell your property or refinance and do other things, you may be asked to do the cash back with those trips to Fiji.
You can't give them back.
You can't give your trip back. So they do it as a cash contribution back. So often it's around that $3,000 mark. So the trip doesn't become free after all.
Okay. So those are kind of the benefits of refinancing. Let's now flip over and look at the costs. So the first one, which we're not seeing at the moment, is rate break fees. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happens with fixed rates?
So the banks reserve the right to pass on the actual cost. So if you've got a fixed home loan and you break that home loan to go to another bank or to resell the property, they reserve the right to take the cost of the loss of that loan being broken and pass it back on to you. But given at the moment that most people's interest rates are going from that lower rate to a higher rate, there is actually no cost involved. So because the bank gets to take that lower sort of interest rate, and so they're actually saving money by taking the higher ones. So why would you actually break a low rate? Well, the rates have actually been increasing so quickly that would actually, if they're coming up to finishing, we want to sort of break those, restructure, and look at putting something a bit more stable in place. So go through that.
Clawback sounds really nasty, and it is.
Clawback's that cash contribution.
So that's just the bank asking for the money they've given you back. And so if you got that in a prior loan and you're refinancing away from that bank, you've got a risk of them asking for some of that back. One of the banks does up to 4 years. It's a tiered structure. So if you refinance or sell the property within the first year, they ask for 100% back, then 75, 50, 25, and nothing. So it is worthwhile because obviously 4 years is quite a long time. So if you're sitting at 3 years with that particular bank, you'll need to pay back 25% of the original cash they gave you.
Is that quite clear when going into refinancing that that's the case for people who are doing it? Or?
People think they've been with their banks for quite some time. So they're like, oh, no, I never received any cash, or they've forgotten about the cash, or it hasn't been the 4 years. And some will think some of the clawback terms have changed. So some of the banks were on 3 years and then some are on 4 years. So it's worth clarifying because some also have a tiered structure. So they'll take a percentage back the longer it is, which is what we're sort of moving to now, but the original structure was 100%. So if you got $5,000 and you're at the 2 years, 11 months, then you have to pay back the $5,000. So you sign one piece of paper to acknowledge it.
It's there in the fine print.
Of course.
And the third thing we've got there is legal costs. And obviously when you move bank, you're taking your mortgage from one bank, which is the securitization of your home, and you're moving all that with the title, security over the title to another bank. So you need a solicitor or someone to assist with the actual legal side of moving that. The solicitor will take the proceeds of money from the new bank and they will do the transfer to the old bank to make sure they're all repaid, and they'll change the title over from one bank to another. So, and what person in for the whole transaction? What are we talking about cost-wise there? What could that be? Generally, it sits for the Auckland housing market for a single transfer, just joint names, or just one company is about $1,300. So it needs to be factored into. Okay, so that's financial costs. So you're weighing up those benefits with the costs, and hopefully it's worth it when you're getting some significant gains from it. That's the key point here. So there's another thing that we look at with refinance and with any loan application really is what's changed since you did the loan originally or you last reviewed it with your bank. And those changes are kind of lifestyle changes, so things at a household level that could affect or improve your ability to borrow. So let's talk a little bit about those and what they could be.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of changes over the years. So if you looked at buying your property 4 or 5 years ago, apart from the price of it, the way that the banks do their assessment as well makes quite a difference. So where it might have been quite easy to get a home loan in the first instance, you're going to face a few sort of roadblocks along the way. So there's just going to be a lot more questions. And in regards to how the banks check for servicing and make sure it's still affordable, they'll go through. So I think we've got a good example of how that works.
And how does Tella help smooth that? Like, so banks have changed their criteria potentially over the last few years. What are the sort of things that you might look at to ensure that you don't get caught by a red herring?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the great thing is we actually have all the calculators. So we have everything with every bank, and we've learnt how they assess in regards to children, vehicles, living costs, expenses. Each bank has a servicing rate behind the scenes. So even though current interest rates at the moment are 5.5%, for example, short term, the banks will assess currently up to 7.95%. So they're going, can you afford the home loan at 7.95% before they'll approve you?
Right.
So we've got the transparency that we get to see all of that to be able to make the right suggestions.
Okay. So let's just dig into it a little bit deeper. So my income could have gone up or gone down, positive or a negative. Potentially can borrow more if it's gone up. If someone's gone to a part-time job, I borrow less. My expenses could have gone up and down. Could have had another child in the meantime, which is an extra cost. Could have bought an extra car. Could have taken out another credit card. Could have got a loan from somewhere, personal loan.
It's the interest-free loans that hurt. Yeah.
So it's those little things that can affect, and people, again, it's a bit like you were saying, Ben, people forget what's happened between the last time they got the loan to now, and they think that everything's just the same, but they forget that maybe some of those things have changed and it could affect the.
Yeah, it's really common because you would have bought the house 3 or 4 years ago. If you're looking to refinance, maybe even longer, you'll think about how many pay rises you've had over that time. But then there's also the child, there is additional costs and things. So, and when you've got daycare costs, that can mitigate pay increases. So it can actually be a lot harder to get a loan top up than when you originally bought. So.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what we've got on the screen now is just an example, and this is a very generic example, but what it shows is essentially a joint income of $120,000 and what a couple could borrow, which is the 707 on the left-hand side. And then we add a child, which takes that down to 670. We add another child, takes it down to 633, and another child taking it down to 596. And that's just one little thing, but it's a good example of what that effect can be on an income. Now, that is possibly an unlikely scenario because often as you're growing your family, your income's growing as well. But it's just a nice example of thinking about what could have changed during that period. Okay, so what other hassles are there in moving? What strains could we put on ourselves by doing that, or is it actually really easy? Something we don't need to worry about?
Yeah, so there's a few small things. So the expectation, I previously mentioned the sort of the cash back. Now, the expectation from the bank to give that cash is that you're going to move over to them. The way that the banks, I suppose, compete within themselves is not where the home loan is or where your credit card is, it's where your income is. So how the banks judge each other is where the income is credited. So they really want your pay. So they want your pay credited to the bank. And from there, that's how they define themselves. Because you can have multiple credit cards or multiple home loans or properties, but where your income goes, that's their entire focus. So you will be asked to transfer at least one income if it's a couple over. And from there, you'll need to set up new automatic payments, get that all sorted, paying other bills and things like that too. So it does take time out. Some banks have switching teams, which is really good. We can fill in a form and we can send off to the bank, and the previous bank will actually provide all the list of all the automatic payments and bill payees, and the new bank will actually get that set up. So they'll help out too. So, but yeah, it's new cards, it's transitioning and swapping over. So yeah, it's time out.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be the biggest negative.
Okay. Yep. Okay. So let's sum it up. So best confirm your interest rates to see what that outcome would be. And to do that, there's a number of ways of doing it, but if you're on the Tella website, we've got a rates page that has all the current rates on that day across all the major banks. In fact, pretty much all the banks in New Zealand and other lenders in the mortgage space. We've got a great Tella repayment calculator that allows you to sort of look at comparisons side by side. So you can put in your existing circumstances into one panel, and then you can open another panel to actually look at what that change would be if you were to go and put in fresh rates, new rates that you've taken off the rates page to see what it might look like. And that'll give you a good idea of what that repayment scenario is going to look like post. And you can break that up into structures where you might have 2 or 3 different rate ranges so that you spread out that rate risk. And maybe, do you want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of having your loan split into 1 or 2 different?
Yeah, so the great thing about refinancing is you basically get to have a fresh start. So I mentioned sort of before that over the last few years, we've done the easy option, which has always been just to refix for a year. So rates have trended down for several years now. So taking a 1-year strategy of just refixing was the cheapest option, not necessarily the safest option long term. And now that we've got this higher, interest rates that keep on increasing, now's a good time to really review and think about things. So if we take that example of a person that fixed their home loan a year ago, $600,000 at 2.29 or 2.79%, now you're looking at repayments going up by $500 per fortnight. Now, if 12 months ago, that person had fixed half of their loan for 2.29 and the other half for 2 or 3 years for a higher interest rate, 2.79 or 3%, what that means is that now you wouldn't be fixing the entire loan again. So you wouldn't have to absorb that $500 per fortnight difference or whatever it may be. It would only be half the loan. And then in a couple of years' time, the other half would come up. So if you're going to refinance or just even restructure and relook at your loans, now would be a good time to really think about going back to the strategies that we used to have years ago when the higher interest rates were around, and that was to split your loan into different parts. So it's not effectively having all your eggs in one basket, it's splitting things out. There's different terms for it. Some people call it hedging, some people call it loan splitting, but it just creates stability.
And part of the Tella process takes you through that as a client, doesn't it? So you can actually look at your options in terms of how to structure it as you go through and do a Tella application online. We need to look at the long-term goals and what the focus is and how long you're looking at living in the property for and what's the purpose of the property. And from there we look at it. Okay. Then the next thing is to kind of confirm that what that cash looks like, and that'll give you something to figure out what that overall net benefit looks like. And again, on the Tella website, we've got a refinance calculator, and you can go in and assess your current bank situation against a potential new bank situation. Because it all varies. So some of them are still doing a lower amount. That also depends on how much equity you have in your house. But some banks are doing 0.25%, some are doing 0.5%, and then we've got a best one at the moment doing 1% cash backs. So that'll give you, that calculator will give you an actual cash amount. It's indicative, but it'll give you a good idea as to where you're best to head to. We talked about the legal costs, and one of the benefits of Tella, I think, over a lot of other services is we have an ability for you to use a Tella panel solicitor, and Tella arranges fixed rate, fixed rate costs in terms of the legal costs there, unless there's things like exceptional bits and pieces outside of what they'd normally do. And then lastly, it's really a matter of going through that Tella application process and getting a loan into the team through the process. Yeah. Have I missed anything?
There's one other thing, just actually to think about the benefits, and this goes back to first home buyers. So if you were a first home buyer in the last 12 months or maybe 2 years, often with a 10% deposit, the banks will load a low equity margin or premium. It's a penalty as such for having a low deposit. If you're going to look at refinancing, if you go to another bank, they may actually value your house higher, which will get rid of that. So it goes back to interest rates again, but it gives you the opportunity that different banks have different valuation systems, and you may be able to borrow more, or you may have a better position where you've got more than 20% deposit, where you went in with 10%, now have over 20, and the banks will give you those special rates. So it's not just for people that have actually owned their property for 3, 4, or 5 years or more. You can actually be a first home buyer and be looking at switching within the first 12 months. So,
Okay.
Or to get rid of that low equity premium.
Great. So we've got a number of questions coming through. So why don't we start on those?
Okay, cool. Well, I think, Ben, this one was in relation to something you were mentioning before. Some quite good ones here. Is a home loan top-up the same as refinancing?
No, because you can stay with your bank and go for a top-up. So it's a good chance to have a good conversation about a restructure, though. But a top-up could be, for example, if you're already with ANZ and you wanted to renovate your house and put in the double glazing or solar panels or go for that Tesla, you could do a top-up of up to $80,000 at that 1%.
Okay. So, can you explain again, the definition of a home loan top-up, like as opposed?
It's an extra loan, really, just so you still have your existing loan. So you can have, the thing is, most people got into this sort of trend of just taking one home loan against the property, but you can actually break your home loan down into multiple parts. So you can break it into 1, 2, 3, or if not more. So a top-up would be keeping your existing home loan in place and getting an additional loan for another purpose. So
with the same bank.
Yeah, with the same bank. If you're going to refinance, then it gives you, because you can stay with your same bank and look at restructuring. So what we do is with a restructure, we still can repay that original loan and break it down into different parts and how that's going to work out better long term. But with a refinance, is generally you're off to another bank and we look at those incentives.
Okay, cool. The next one is, can a broker finance or refinance a tiny house, like the tiny homes?
Yeah.
It's quite a big trend.
So a tiny home is not technically a home for the banks as a security, but what they look at is the actual land that's on.
Okay.
So the land will be taken as security, but the house, because it can be moved, if you've got a tiny home on the piece of land and then you decide to take it on a holiday, that house, the tiny home is no longer on there.
Right.
So it has to be attached to services. So general rule of thumb is that it must be fixed in with power, water, and septic system. There should also be a main road that goes to their property.
Right.
So,
interesting.
It's the same. So when you do relocated, so different from a tiny home, but relocatable homes that are being built. So if you kind of have to go to the bank of mum and dad or find some other cash, because if you're going to relocate a house onto the property, it's only when it's connected to all services that the bank will lend against it. So there is other ways to do tiny homes though. So because they're on a trailer and the trailer can be taken as security. That's a conversation for another day.
A lot within that. Another really good question is, what percentage of your income should your mortgage be to be considered affordable by the banks?
This is a personal opinion. If you're at 50%, you're in trouble. So personal opinion, I would say it's sitting at about 33%. So, but we're looking at lending up to 40. And then if you're asking for a loan 50% of your income, you're going to struggle. So
okay.
Actually, to look at that as a different perspective though, So if we go back a couple of years with a slightly lower interest rate and slightly lower cost of living, because we have to recognize now that our cost of living is so much higher. The cost of groceries and everything just keeps on increasing. So a few years ago, the banks would lend about 6 times your gross income. So for a standard family that had $100,000 as gross income, the banks would look to lend about $600,000, as long as the deposit and everything worked out fine. It was up to about 620,000, so 6.2. Now we're really looking about 5.5 times. So if you're in $100,000 worth of gross income, you're looking at borrowing up to about 550,000.
Okay.
So there's a few other factors that come into that, because they are sort of looking at age and making sure that that loan is repaid by the standard retirement age or shortly after. So somebody applying who is 30 is a little bit different to somebody who is applying who's 45, because if you're 45, you won't be getting that 30-year loan term. So yeah, it'll be looking at 25 years.
Okay.
So, which reduces down how much you can borrow.
Yeah. So it seems like it's going to be different person to person.
It is. Everybody's circumstances are different.
Cool. How often would refinancing be suggested? Again,
so there is refinancing, but you can also restructure. Right. So you've got to look at what's the best, for you. I recently actually had somebody who looked at refinancing, and we went through everything. We restructured their loan. They'd actually been with their bank for 8 years, and they really enjoyed being with their bank. So we had a discussion around that, and in the end, even with their bank actually came to the party with a incentive to stay and not leave, which was really good. So we restructured their loan. They also got a cash contribution for not leaving, and they were happy. So for them, that was the ideal situation. So if your current bank's not going to come to the party, or there's other costs, or it's just exceptional savings, then yeah, we go for it. But you wouldn't want to be doing it more than once every 3 or 4 years, because you'll end up paying back the cash contribution. You've also paid the legal costs, and you're actually going to be worse off.
Right.
So, but we just need to look at what the interest rates are, cash contributions, other costs affected, and any other fees that may be incurred. So sometimes you also have valuation costs as well.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's interesting, because a question that could come off the back of that one would be like, is there a too soon to refinance? But what you were talking about in regards to first home buyers, it's almost like, well, they might want to consider it sooner than later.
Yeah, so a first home buyer may not have even gotten a cash contribution when they signed up. So they were classed as being lucky to even get a home loan in the first instance. So they had to pay for the valuations, they paid for the legal costs, they got no cash contributions or anything like that, and they're with their current bank. And when they go to look at refixing their home loan or doing something, the bank may not even come to the party. So therefore, they may just have a standard rate. So a first home buyer may have been in their place for 11 months. Now's a good time to actually look at what the other banks have on offer, because if they've got the equity, they can then go to another bank. They'll get the cash finally. They won't have to do the valuation. They may have a margin for having a low deposit currently, and that could be removed by going to a new bank. So it will come down to the electronic valuations the banks use, but there is a lot more benefits in it for first home buyers.
So generally, would you say there's a too soon to look at refinancing or restructuring? Not
if it's going to save you in the long term. No. So, because at the end of the day, it's just doing some numbers and making sure that you're better off. If it's not going to work, there's no cost.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing is Tella aren't going to put you into a situation where they move you for no good reason.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the whole process that we have to go through to.
Yeah, there's got to be a benefit. Otherwise, we'll go through other suggested sort of ideas.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a great example. The bank looking to keep the client by giving them some cash. They've actually saved themselves in a way, because to onboard the client would have cost them a heck of a lot more than to keep them. So it's kind of a win-win. But sometimes you've got to have that discussion around refinance with the bank to actually get some action. So that's where it can be beneficial, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. The next one is, well, I guess kind of related to that, does jumping banks for better deals matter? I suppose what impact does that have just jumping around potentially.
It used to be quite common. And
Right.
so there were people that were literally switching from one bank to another every couple of years. And that's when those those clawbacks came in. They started to go, hang on, this is not beneficial because people aren't showing any loyalty. And that's where they wanted to get those 3-4 years worth of loyalty. So from my perspective, if financially you're better off, then it's worthwhile, because the clients that I had before, they'd been with their bank for 8 years. They'd never received a cash contribution in the first place. So we just look at everything, and it was a little bit different because they actually got incentivized to stay, which was nice.
Yeah. I guess it's that 3 to 5 year sweet spot that most people are looking at refinancing in.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, every situation is different. If you've got no cost to doing it earlier, then you might jump on it. Yeah.
So there's other things that also can happen. So if you've got an investment property, for example, investors like to have their properties on interest only. Repaying down a loan doesn't sort of make financial sense for some people. They just want to sort of keep the loan in place. So with those, the banks will only do a maximum term of 5 years of interest only. So if that period's coming up, it's a good time to review, and they will look to then switch to another bank to get another 5 years on that interest only. Right. So because their current bank may not want to do it again. So,
cool. Cool. And last one, which I think is a good one to round it all up, is there's a lot to consider within all of this, and maybe some of the Tella calculators can help with this. But how exactly would you go about actually weighing up what's going to be best for you, or who would you reach out to, or what resources do you need in order to be able to do that?
So the main thing will be looking. So yes, there actually is the calculator. There's a refinance calculator. But you'd also want to look at what the repayments are. So that's breaking down what your current home loans are on. So what the amount is, what the current interest rate is, and what you're going to go to, and what the financial difference is. And then is there any valuation costs? Is there legal costs? We talked about the 1,300, and then the cash incentives to do that. And it's also comparing what your current bank will do, and then if there's another one that will do lower rates. So it's just a few spreadsheets, or an email, to put it all together.
But if it's beyond that, and one thing that Tella does is we've got live chat, which is actually Ben and his team during the day.
Awesome.
So, and we've also got other ways of contacting us. But we're always happy to talk. We're always happy to run situational stuff and bounce it off ourselves with the client, to try and understand how we could do things better. It doesn't always have to be in that digital realm, although we do all of the application and everything in the digital realm. We still like to have those conversations, and we've still got a great team of home loan specialists in the background that can have those conversations. So whatever medium you like to do it in, we're happy to talk. Cool. I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this webinar tonight. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us too, and
thanks for having me.
Moderating the questions from your panel. And we'll see you for the next one.